Number 5. My brother was diagnosed with noctambulism or sleepwalking from an early age. He stopped from the ages of 6 to 14, but for the past 10 months I've witnessed him get up from his bed, we share a room, in the middle of the night and calmly make his way into the kitchen and start banging pans together or trying to open the front door, which concerns me the most, seeing the place that we live in, not the safest neighborhood in LA. I told my mom and he began taking medication, which helped a lot. I thought my getting up in the middle of the night to lead my brother back to bed nights were over until last Friday. During a particular hot night I woke up drenched in my own sweat. As I threw all my blankets down on the ground below, I looked over towards my brother's bed and to my dismay he's not freaking there. I groaned as I got up, listening with all my might for his whereabouts. I checked the kitchen, mom's bedroom, and bathroom in total darkness since the electricity was off for some reason. Not seeing him in any of those rooms, I checked the last place left, the door leading to the outside. I made my way to the door and he wasn't there. I began getting anxiety, not knowing what to do. As a last failed attempt I moved closer to the door and peeked through the peephole, and to my utter disbelief and relief there's my brother. I could barely make out his figure since the light in the outside hallways had gone out too, most likely because of the heat wave, but sure enough there he was. He was facing the opposite way, his back towards me, and I thought I distinctly made out his Walmart bought superhero t-shirt he always wears. I opened the door and silently mutter, "There you are," under my breath as I take his arm in the complete darkness. Me having done this before, follow my usual drill and slowly lead him through the living room and through the long hallway leading to our bedroom. I open the door and I start making my way towards his bed to lay him down, when I accidentally slipped on one of my blankets I had previously thrown aside, letting out a scream as I hit the ground with a thump. And that's when I hear a familiar voice, my brother's, asking me what the hell was going on. His head popped out from the other side of his bed. Apparently he had been laying peacefully on the ground out of sight this whole time. My body went limp and my heart started racing as I looked up at the person next to me, looking down at me. My brother quickly realized what was going on, even though he was under medication, and tried to launch at the intruder, but to no avail. The intruder swiftly moved out of the way and broke into a run, making his way out of our 2-bedroom apartment as I pleaded with my brother to let him go. As the intruder made his way out of our 2-bedroom apartment, he began laughing hysterically and muttering stuff. I may have misheard, but I remember distinctly hearing my name. Soon after that my mom got off work early after our phone call and she later called the police, but they weren't much help. 2 weeks later we moved out of there. Even though all that was a long time ago and my brother and I joke around about it sometimes, at night I'm still left wondering who was that creep and if he really knew my name. If so, had I met him before? His laugh did sound familiar, but it's impossible for me to pinpoint where. Anyway, creepy boy I thought was my brother and let me lead him through my apartment without saying a word. Let's not meet Ajian. Number 4. So this all happened around 3 years ago. I was 16 and just moved from Malbork, Poland to a small town in America. I barely spoke English and had trouble making friends. The only friend I had was my neighbor Alex. I only became friends when I heard her dad say some words in Polish. I walked up and said in English, "Do you speak Polish?" She replied saying yes, and we continued to talk and eventually started to date. She would translate things for me and help me learn English. Fast forward a couple of months and Alex and I are in her house watching a movie. Her living room has a lot of full-body windows that are usually covered with curtains. I got a feeling that we were being watched. I kinda just shook it off as I continued to watch the movie. Soon we heard knocks on the door. They started as quiet but got louder and louder. I yelled "Kto to jest?" Translated as "Who is it?" No reply. After that, the windows behind us shattered. I grabbed Alex's hand and ran to her parents' room. She called the police as I pushed myself against the door as it had no lock. I heard beating against the door and many voices were speaking, yelling, "We'll get thou eventually and get you." Alex went to the closet and grabbed a handgun. She handed it to me and sat down, putting her weight against the door. I yelled, "The police are on the way and I have gun." The men continued to hit the door and eventually the police came. The 3 men were linked to a murder and all got life sentence. I'm just glad that the police got there before the door was broken down. I can't even imagine what would happen to Alex or I if the police never came. Hopefully I never see a picture of them again. Number 3. My family is full of drug addicts and alcoholics, most of which I have not had contact with for a long time. This is just one of the stories I have to share which definitely freaked me out and one I certainly have not forgotten. One of my uncles was seriously into ice. He would use all his money on it and had been in and out of jail frequently. He would always come to my parents for money and we often obliged until one day it got out of hand. I was 5 to 6 at the time this happened, so it was very frightening. My uncle had come over completely off his face and was demanding money from my parents. My dad yelled at my brother, Mum and I to hide in my room and shut the curtains. My dad had enough of his shit and told him to fuck off. Next minute he brings out a crowbar and starts threatening that if my dad didn't give him the money he would severely hurt and rape my mother in front of my brother and I, forcing us to watch. Fair to say my dad fucked him up pretty good as he came back inside with blood on his hands. Didn't hear from said uncle for a very long time. Fucked up drug addict uncle, please, let's not meet. Number 2. I've browsed through for quite a while now and finally decided that I'd add my own experience on here. I'll apologize now for the length of the story. This was about 4 years ago, when I was pregnant with my 3rd daughter. My husband, kids, and I had just moved to a big city. I've always been a quiet, stick-to-myself homebody and moving to such a huge place really stressed me out. It took me months before I'd finally venture out on my own because I was terrified of driving in such a foreign place. Plus, I was also scared of the area we had moved into. 3 murders happened the same day we moved there, so I worried about carjackings and shootings and rapes and every other thing that comes with a big city. I rarely went out of the house and made my husband believe that I had developed OCD from how many times I checked the door and window locks. Yeah, I was pretty on edge. Fast forward a few months, and we moved to a new neighborhood. Not the best, but certainly a few steps up from where we had been. I slowly started getting out of the house more and more, and would even stay out when it was getting dark. I resumed my daily life without worrying about getting carjacked or shot in broad daylight, and eventually found a job at a funeral home. Now, working at the funeral home was great, with only the occasional nope moments mixed in here or there, but the hours were long and inconsistent. Some nights, I would get home at 5 p.m., and other nights, I wouldn't get home until 2 a.m. It was one of the nights that I had worked late, close to 1:30 a.m., when I got a text from my husband telling me to pick up milk on the way home from work. I stopped at the closest Walmart, and went in for milk. However, being a chick, I decided that I needed about 50 other items and went about my shopping. While strolling down the dairy aisle, I accidentally bumped into a man. He seemed like any other person, but his appearance kind of unnerved me. He was tall, with long, dirty hair and covered in dirt and grime. His clothes were threadbare, and his pants barely stayed up on his thin frame. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't used to seeing homeless people, but I assumed that's what he was. I apologized and went about my way. Several aisles over, I pass by him again, and he smiles at me, but in a creepy sort of way. Whatever, shrugged it off, kept shopping. About 10 minutes passed, and I was walking down the feminine hygiene aisle. I stopped to grab some things, and when I turn around, it's the same guy and he is standing about 4 feet away from me. He doesn't look at me directly, but I can feel him staring out of the corner of his eye. That was my cue to GTFO, and so I turned my cart and practically ran to the checkouts. As I'm unloading my shopping cart, he comes to the same register. He starts unloading his cart, and keeps throwing things over the little divider that I had put behind my stuff. I move his things back, and he puts his hands on mine and asks me to stop. This pissed me off, so I asked what the deal was. "Can you pay for some of my stuff?" I realized that he had been watching me shopping and, since I was dressed nicely, probably assumed that I had money. I politely tell him no, and wait for the cashier to ring up my items. Two more people come to the same register, and he begins asking them if they'll pay for his stuff as well. The nice girl in front of me already said she'll pay for half of it, he tells them. She said she'd help me. At this point, I'm already paying for my stuff, so I turn to him and tell him, firmly, I said no. He, and the other customers glare at me, and then begins cursing and yelling at me. This fucking bitch lied to me. She lied to me. She said she'd help me. I tell him to fuck off, that I'm too tired to deal with his shit, and he should get a job to pay for his stuff, which happened to be condoms, paper towels, cleaners, etc., by the way. I might have said yes if it were food. I turn to leave, and he grabs my arm. You're not going anywhere until you pay for this. I'll call the cops on you. I slap his hand off of me, tell him to go fuck himself, and storm off toward the exit. I quickly get out to my car, throw my stuff in the back seat and shove the cart in the opposite direction. I jump in and start the car. I was backing up when I noticed a beaten-up Camaro turn its lights on behind me. Fuck it, I haul ass out of the parking lot. So does the Camaro. I start driving toward home, but had a gut feeling that I should take a different route. Now, I wasn't sure that this car was actually following me. After all, it's a big city and there are usually lots of cars going the same route as you, but as I kept checking my rear view mirror, I had a bad feeling every time I saw that car. My suspicions were confirmed when I drove through my work cemetery, and so did they. I called my husband and told him, I think someone's following me. He advised me to get home ASAP and that he'd call the cops. I sped toward the house, making unnecessary turns, all with this creep right behind me. I can now hear him screaming at me, and he begins hanging out of his window, waving his arm and telling me to pull over. He sped up parallel with me and tried to cut me off, but I slam on the brakes and move around him. He continues trying to get beside me, screaming and yelling obscenities, and starts throwing stuff at my car. At this point, I'm a sobbing, nervous wreck, scared to death that I'm going to get into an accident and this creep is going to do God knows what to me. I'm almost home now, coming close to my turn when I realize something that makes my stomach drop. I live in a gated community. Now, this might not sound so bad, except for the fact that you have to wait for the gate to open. I have to sit here, for up to 30 seconds, and wait for an automatic gate to open wide enough for me to drive through, and it will continue to stay open for another couple of minutes. I call my husband again and begin screaming for him to get out here, now. I turn into the entrance and the gate is already open. I speed through, worried that it will start closing before I can get to it, and luckily for me, it doesn't. However, creepy guy is still on my ass. I don't really know what to do, so I lay down on the horn, pray that my husband is on his way to the gate, and park the car. The guy slows down, turns his headlights off, and parks about 20 feet behind me. I hear his car door open. In the dark, I see him sauntering toward my car, holding something in his hand that looks like maybe a crowbar or a pipe of some sort. One of our neighbor's patio lights come on and I see my husband walking toward us, in nothing but his combat boots and tidy whities, holding his shotgun. He shoots in the guy's direction, screams for him to get the fuck out of here, and shoots again. I see the guy run back to his car, and he quickly reverses it, hits one of our neighbor's cars and hauls balls out of there. Never saw him again, but for the next 6 months, I'd occasionally see a beat-up Camaro hanging out at the end of the street. We have since moved, and my knight in tidy whiteies bought me a Ruger 9mm to keep in the car, just in case. Creepy homeless guy, let's never meet again. Number 1. Okay, so this happened about a year ago. I've been debating on creating an account and posting it for that long. I've been dealing with the shame aspect of it and have been worrying that someone might recognize me and slash or him. I apologize for the length, but I'm trying to fit all of the relevant details. Anyways, this started about a year and a half ago. At the time, I worked at a local gas station with my roommate while going to college for my bachelor's in psychology. My boss had a knack for hiring the worst employees, and Tom was no different. When he walked into his interview, he had long, frizzy hair, ripped, dirty jeans, and a stained t-shirt. She hired him after a brief interview. The first time I officially met Tom, my roommate was training him. He walked right up to me with a big smile on his face, stuck his hand out, and stated, "Hi, I'm Tom. It's nice to meet you." I struggle with how to describe the feeling I got looking at him. There was this visceral aversion towards him that I felt in the pit of my stomach. Looking back on it, I think it was his smile. It almost seemed predatory, red flag number one. This is the first time I've ever encountered such a feeling in my life. I tersely said yup and brushed by him quickly. In that moment, I had decided to stay as far away from him as humanly possible. Unfortunately, this was not exactly possible because we worked together. The first few weeks of his employment, he was relentless. Every time we worked together, he would follow me around to talk. Somehow, I found myself talking to him more and more. After a while, he asked to hang out after work. I complied. We drove around and smoked some weed. No big deal. He wanted to hang out more and more. He was okay to smoke with, so I didn't see a problem with it. He asked me a lot of questions about myself, but not in a creepy way. It was like he genuinely wanted to know more about me. This meant that I got to know more about him. He lived with his grandparents, but stated that he paid them like $200 in rent every month. He informed me that he used to use meth, but no longer did so. Before meeting him, I was a person that believed everyone deserved second chances. He was only 20 and I just figured that he was trying to figure his life out. Fast forward to the beginning of November. By this point in time, we spent almost every day together. It wasn't even questioned, it was expected. He actually had some redeeming qualities. He got along with my dogs and actually really liked them. When I had to work overnights at the gas station, he would come over and spend time with them. Despite this, I felt like he was using me. He would buy things on my Xbox using my debit card. He was glued to it. I bought him cigarettes, pop, and food. When I confronted him about using me, he went on a tirade about how he would never do that and I could ask any of his friends who would tell me the same thing. I had only met one of his friends and this person had told me that Tom was the worst person in the world. Tom asked me to date him. I wish I could tell you that I said no. I can only say that I was still hurting about the end of a really long relationship, and thought I could get over that with Tom. As soon as we started dating, he asked me when he could move in with me. Thankfully, I told him that wasn't even on the table right now. After this, it was night and day. He would say mean things to me to upset me, but when I called him on it, it was never his fault. I was just too sensitive. We stopped hanging out. There would be weeks where I barely heard from him. We broke up twice in that time. The last time was in January after not hearing from him for a month. He had been fired a few weeks later for stealing over $300 from the register over the course of his employment. This isn't counting the merchandise he stole. I also found out that he never stopped using meth. This is my biggest embarrassment. I know all of the signs of meth use and didn't pick up on it when we were together. I asked him where he wanted me to send his stuff. He told me to bring it to his grandparents' house. That wasn't going to happen. He would frequently come into my gas station drunk and rant about me to my co-workers, telling them that I was being a shitty person and not letting him see our dogs. I had them for 2 years before I even met him. After a month of dodging me about his stuff, he told my roommate that he didn't care if I threw it in the garbage. I waited a full month and then I threw it. He started coming into the gas station when I was working to try to talk to me. I would avoid him and he would tell my co-workers to give me messages. He'd leave me written notes asking about his stuff. I ignored all of them. A month later, he was still sending me Facebook messages about his stuff. Finally, I conceded and sent him a message apologizing but informing him that I had thrown his stuff in the garbage. As it turns out, this was a ploy. He sent me a 5-page letter, telling me how much he cared about me and that he never appreciated me for that the person I am when we were dating. It was a long, rambling letter with big words just jumbled together. If anyone would like to read it, I can post it in here. I keep it for comic relief. I told him exactly where I thought he could shove this love letter. About a month or so later, I was working the early shift at the gas station. I woke up to a text message from my roommate. It contained a link to a local newspaper and OMG. AKELE35, you have to read this. The link was a news article talking about how Tom and his brother had taken a random man out on a gravel road, shot him 5 times at close range, and stole his wallet. They left him there to die. He survived the assault, but is still working on getting right again. This gravel road was 5 miles from my house. Tom was sentenced to 6 years in prison. His brother testified against him and claimed that he was unaware that Tom had shot the guy because he stayed in the truck. A few months after the brother was released, he murdered an elderly couple, stole their guns and cars, and then burnt their house down. He's in the county jail, awaiting trial. I'm still very much haunted by all of this. Again, I apologize for the length.